My name is Cynthia Clark, and for years I carried a secret no one in my family knew. I earned $33,000 a month as a senior project manager at a major tech company. On paper, I'm successful, stable, secure, but at home, I've always been the disappointment, the quiet one who didn't carry the family legacy like my older brother did. So, one night, I decided to find out where I truly stood. I told them I needed $15,000 for my parents' medical treatment and waited to see what would happen. Right after college, I made a decision that surprised a lot of people. I moved out. No dramatic fight. No slam doors. Just a quiet choice to stand on my own 2 feet. I found a small apartment near a bus line because I couldn't afford anything else. The place had thin walls, secondhand blinds, and a heater that made a strange clicking sound every time it turned on. But it was mine. And every bill that came in my name felt like proof that I was building something without leaning on anyone. Money was tight in those early months. I tracked every dollar, rent, utilities, groceries. I took part-time jobs while applying for full-time roles in project management, the field I had chosen, even though it meant nothing to my family's trucking legacy. While my brother was learning routes and dispatch systems, I was learning how to read Gantt charts and coordinate deadlines. My first role was junior, nothing glamorous. I tracked timelines for software releases. I scheduled meetings between developers and stakeholders who barely spoke the same language. I updated spreadsheets. I chased down status reports. Most days, no one noticed the work unless something went wrong. But I noticed. I stayed late to understand why projects stalled. I taught myself tools like Jira until navigating it felt second nature. I studied agile methodologies, not just enough to pass interviews, but enough to actually lead conversations. I learned how to anticipate bottlenecks before they exploded into crises. Slowly, supervisors started trusting me with more. There's something steady about watching your competence grow. It's not loud, it's not flashy. It's just this quiet accumulation of proof that you can handle more than you did yesterday. One successful delivery turned into another. Then I was coordinating cross-functional teams. Then I was overseeing budgets that had more zeros than I'd ever imagined being responsible for. The stakes got higher, the risks got heavier, but so did my confidence. Years passed like that, long days, careful decisions, constant adaptation. Eventually, I reached the senior project manager level at a major tech company. That title didn't come from connections or family backing. It came from surviving high-stakes initiatives, negotiating with vendors, calming clients during rocky deployments, and aligning technical teams with real-world expectations. And yes, the compensation reflected it. I earn $33,000 a month now. Even saying that out loud still feels surreal sometimes. That number represents years of effort, mistakes, corrections, and persistence. It built savings. It built security. It built a life where I don't wake up worrying about whether the rent will clear. But if you walked into my apartment, you wouldn't guess any of that. I still live in a modest one-bedroom. The furniture is simple, comfortable, but not impressive. I drive a practical sedan that gets good mileage and doesn't demand attention. I cook most of my meals, groceries, basic ingredients, nothing extravagant. I've never felt the need to upgrade my life just to prove something outwardly. Maybe part of me didn't want the upgrades to change the dynamic with my family. Maybe I didn't want money to become a new variable in an already complicated equation. When I visited home, the conversations always circled back to the trucking company. My brother managed it full-time. It was the family's pride, the legacy my parents built from the ground up. That business was more than income. It was identity. So when I shared updates about promotions or project wins, the reactions were polite. Brief, that's nice. A nod, a quick smile. And then the focus shifted. Back to fuel contracts, back to new routes, back to equipment upgrades, back to how the company was expanding into longer distance hauls. At neighborhood gatherings, my dad would proudly explain how my brother renegotiated supplier terms or improved delivery times. My mom would talk about warehouse partnerships and growth percentages. Heads would nod. People would clap him on the back. When someone asked what I did, the explanation felt shorter. Software rollouts, remote teams, internal process improvements. The energy faded. The conversation moved on. It wasn't cruel. It was just clear. In their world, success meant carrying forward the family name through the business. I had stepped outside of that world. I built something that didn't attach to the legacy they understood. So it didn't carry the same weight. Early on, I made another quiet decision. I never shared exact numbers about my income. Not because I was ashamed, not because I didn't trust myself, but because I wanted my independence to stay clean. I didn't want expectations forming in the background. I didn't want subtle shifts where I suddenly became a resource instead of a daughter. Privacy became part of my stability. My daily routine settled into a rhythm I actually loved. Mornings reviewing dashboards and project health metrics. Afternoons solving blockers with teams across time zones. Evenings documenting updates and planning next steps. It required discipline. It demanded clarity. But it gave me a sense of control that felt deeply grounding. Outside of work, my life was simple on purpose. Weekend hikes in nearby parks, podcasts about industry trends while cooking dinner, coffee meetups with colleagues who understood the language of milestones and deadlines. I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation at family barbecues. I needed forward motion, and I had it. The strange part is, I was content. Genuinely. Not in a loud, celebratory way, in a steady, grounded way. I liked the person I was becoming. I like knowing that everything in my life, every dollar, every opportunity, every promotion, came from my own effort. But even contentment doesn't erase contrast. Every visit home reminded me of it. The subtle comparisons, the way pride pooled around my brother's achievements and barely rippled toward mine. The unspoken hierarchy of whose path mattered more. Over time, that difference stopped surprising me. It simply settled into place. A quiet divide formed, not explosive, not dramatic. Just a steady awareness that I had built a life they didn't fully see, and maybe didn't fully value. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself independence was enough. But somewhere deep down, a small question lingered. If things ever truly mattered, if roles were reversed, would they stand by me the way they always stood by him? A few months ago, I stopped by my parents' house unannounced. It wasn't anything dramatic. Mom had mentioned she needed a few groceries during a quick phone call earlier that week. So I picked some up on my way home and decided to drop them off. The visit started the way they always did. Small talk in the kitchen, unpacking bags, commenting on the weather. Dad sat in the living room with the television humming softly in the background. Everything felt Ordinary. Familiar. Too familiar. At one point, there was a natural lull in the conversation, so I stepped into the hallway to hang up my coat. That's when I heard voices drifting from the study. The door wasn't fully closed, just slightly ajar. Mom and Jason. Their tones were low, but the house was quiet enough that I could make out every word. It wasn't casual conversation. There was an edge to it. An investor had backed out, just like that. After reviewing updated financial reports, he'd pulled his support. The reports showed debt levels that were far worse than anyone outside the company had realized. Operating losses had been stacking up. Cash reserves were thinner than they'd admitted publicly. Mom's voice carried a kind of restrained panic. She was worried about payroll drivers, mechanics, staff who depended on those checks to support their own families. There were upcoming pay periods, and without that, investors' backing covering them would mean dipping into personal savings. Savings meant for retirement. Jason sounded defensive, tired, frustrated. He admitted that expenses had escalated more than he anticipated. New equipment, upgraded vehicles, travel that he framed as networking opportunities. He insisted those investments were supposed to generate growth, supposed to bring in bigger routes and longer distance contracts. But the revenue hadn't kept pace. Routes weren't bringing in what they used to. Margins were tighter. Expansion required loans, and those loans came with covenants tied to performance benchmarks. Missed benchmarks meant lenders could call in the debt early, and they were starting to. Mom said something that stuck with me. We can't keep pretending everything is fine when bills are piling up like this. Pretending. That word echoed. Jason pushed back, arguing that cutting expenses would hurt employee morale and damage relationships he'd built over years. But Mom pressed harder. They were facing real cash flow shortages. If payroll bounced, contracts could evaporate overnight. Then came the part that made my stomach drop. Some of the audited withdrawals had been labeled personal, not operational, not strategic, personal. The room went quiet for a few seconds after that, as if even they needed to absorb what it meant. Personal withdrawals in a business already drowning in debt. That wasn't just bad management. That was risk, layered on top of risk. I stood there in the hallway, completely still, feeling like I had stepped into a different version of reality. For years, the trucking company had been presented as steady, reliable, the solid foundation of the family, the legacy. Now I was hearing about debt accumulation beyond sustainable limits, loans being called in, investors losing confidence, retirement savings potentially on the line. The image cracked. When their voices faded deeper into the study, I walked back into the kitchen like nothing had happened. I finished unpacking the groceries. I nodded along to casual comments. I said goodbye and drove home, but my mind wouldn't settle. That night my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. She works at a bank, and her professional circles often overlap with local business financing. Her text was simple at first. Hey, is everything okay with your family's business? I heard some tough rumors today. My chest tightened. I asked what she meant carefully. She didn't share confidential details, but she confirmed enough. There were discussions about restructuring. Lenders were concerned. Financial statements had raised red flags. There were conversations about personal withdrawals that didn't align with operational necessity. It wasn't gossip. It was real. Potential asset seizures were being floated if fresh capital didn't materialize soon. Trucks, core assets essential for daily roots could be sold off to satisfy loan obligations. Without those, the company would collapse almost immediately. Sarah added that she was there if I wanted to talk. I stared at my phone for a long time before responding. Concern came first. Genuine, heavy concern. My parents had poured decades into that business. Their retirement plans were tied to it. Their home was likely collateralized. If the company fell, it wouldn't just be numbers on a spreadsheet. It would ripple through their entire lives. I pictured Mom opening certified letters, Dad trying to stay calm while reading legal notices, the drivers who depended on steady work. I wasn't heartless. I wasn't indifferent. But beneath the concern, something else stirred. Memory. All the times, resources had flowed freely toward Jason's decisions. The house down payment pulled from a certificate of deposit because it would help him oversee operations. The upgraded truck covered because it was good for the business. Public praise at block parties for expansions and partnerships that made him the clear successor. And the quieter moments, my certification fees dismissed. My laptop upgrade framed as unnecessary. My promotions acknowledged but quickly overshadowed by discussions of fuel contracts and fleet expansions. For years, the narrative had been clear. Jason needed support to sustain the legacy. My path was separate, less urgent, less essential. Now the legacy was cracking, and suddenly I had information they didn't know I possessed. I drove around that night longer than I needed to, just thinking. If I stepped in financially, I could. I had the savings, I had the income. I could inject capital quietly, stabilize things temporarily, maybe buy them time to restructure. But what would that actually change? Would it shift the dynamic? Would it create mutual respect? Or would it simply reinforce the same pattern, resources flowing one direction when needed? Gratitude fading once the crisis passed. I didn't want to make a decision fueled purely by resentment. That wasn't who I was. But I also couldn't ignore the history that shaped my hesitation. Empathy and caution pulled against each other. On one hand, they were my parents. On the other, I had spent years building independence precisely to avoid becoming a safety net for choices I never had a voice in. The more I replayed the overheard conversation, the clearer one thing became. This wasn't a minor setback. It was structural. Debt accumulation layered over time, loans tied to optimistic projections, personal spending mixed into operational accounts. This wasn't a simple cash infusion problem. It was a pattern problem. And patterns don't disappear just because money shows up. That realization settled heavily. I wasn't ready to confront them. I wasn't ready to reveal what I knew. And I definitely wasn't ready to write a check without understanding something deeper. Before I made any move, before I decided whether to help or walk away, I needed clarity. Not about the numbers, about where I truly stood. That night, after overhearing everything, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from years ago that I had convinced myself didn't matter anymore. Mom didn't hesitate. She cashed out a 4-bedroom house closer to the dispatch center. He framed it as a strategic move, faster response times, stronger oversight, better leadership presence. Mom didn't hesitate. She cashed out a certificate of deposit to help cover the down payment. I remember her saying it was an investment in the company's future, an investment in him. Around that same time, I had asked for help covering fees for an advanced certification that would directly impact my career growth. It wasn't a huge amount, just enough to ease the pressure while I was juggling rent and student loans. The response was careful, measured. Cash flow is tight right now. We have to prioritize unexpected repair costs on the trailers. I told myself it made sense. Then there was the truck. Jason upgraded to a heavy-duty pickup with all the towing packages, the polished exterior, the works. My parents covered the difference between the trade-in value and the new price. It was described as a practical business expense, something that projected strength during client visits. Around that same period, my laptop started struggling to handle larger data sets for work. I needed something more powerful. I mentioned it casually once, not even directly, asking for money, just venting about the cost. Mom suggested I monitor discretionary spending more carefully because the trucking industry had seasonal fluctuations. I bought the laptop myself. At neighborhood block parties, Dad would beam while talking about Jason's latest expansion. New warehouse partnerships, renegotiated fuel contracts routes increasing by 20% in a quarter. People nodded with admiration. He sounded proud, deeply proud. When someone asked about my role managing software rollouts for large corporate clients, the energy shifted. Polite interest. Then, a quick pivot back to freight volumes and fleet efficiency. It wasn't one big dramatic rejection. It was accumulation. Christmas dinners followed the same rhythm. Jason would describe implementing tracking systems across the fleet. Mom would highlight how those changes attracted larger accounts. Praise flowed easily, naturally. My project when streamlining internal processes, delivering. Ahead of schedule, mentoring junior managers were acknowledged, but they never lingered. They didn't carry the same weight in the room. For years, I told myself I didn't need that weight. I didn't need the applause. I had my own version of success, my own income, my own stability. But hearing about the company's financial collapse shifted something. If they asked me for help now, and I knew they would eventually, what would that help represent? Would it be partnership, respect, or would it be another extension of a pattern where Jason's choices were buffered and mine were expected to stand alone? Resentment is a tricky thing. It doesn't always burn hot. Sometimes it just sits there, quiet and patient, waiting for the right trigger. The overheard conversation was that trigger. I didn't want to react out of bitterness. I didn't want to punish anyone. But I also couldn't ignore the imbalance that had defined our adult lives. If I stepped in with money, it would be significant. It wouldn't be symbolic. It would tie me directly into the survival of the company they had always prioritized over me. And I needed to know something before I made that decision. I needed to know whether, if the roles were reversed, they would show up for me. Not in theory, not in vague reassurances, in action. That thought stayed with me for days. At first, it felt childish, petty even. Why test your own family? Why not just have a direct conversation? But direct conversations had never really changed anything before. They ended with explanations, justifications. It's not about choosing sides. Jason needs more guidance. The business is complicated. I didn't need more explanations. I needed clarity. So I started thinking about a scenario that would flip the dynamic without revealing what I knew about the company's debt. Something that would feel urgent, real, personal. Medical expenses. Specifically medical treatment for my parents. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it made the scenario believable. Insurance gaps are common. Unexpected procedures happen. $15,000 felt realistic, large enough to matter small enough to be plausible. I researched typical out-of-pocket costs for certain diagnostics and follow-up treatments. I outlined symptoms that wouldn't trigger immediate panic, but would justify urgency. I rehearsed how I would say it without overacting. The more I planned it, the heavier it felt, because this wasn't just about money. It was about watching their faces, listening to their tone, seeing whether concern would override history. Would they ask questions? Would they offer support? Would they rally the way they always had for Jason's investments and expansions? Or would they dismiss it? Part of me hoped quietly, stubbornly that I was wrong, that beneath everything they would show up, that the years of imbalance were circumstantial, not fundamental. But another part of me prepared for confirmation. I chose a weekend dinner, familiar setting, comfortable rhythm. Mid-meal, when everyone was relaxed enough to absorb serious news without immediately bracing for conflict. The stakes felt higher than I expected, because once I saw their reaction, I wouldn't be able to unsee it. And whatever I learned would shape what I did next. I didn't tell anyone about the plan. Not Sarah, not friends. This was something I had to see for myself. By the time that weekend approached, my resolve had hardened, but so had my nerves. I wasn't just staging a test. I was preparing to find out whether the distance I had felt for years was imagined or real. That Sunday, I arrived a little earlier than usual. Mom was in the kitchen, glazing a baked ham with brown sugar, the sweet smell filling the house in a way that instantly pulled me back to childhood. Scalloped potatoes were already layered in a casserole dish, cheese bubbling at the edges. A bowl of fresh salad sat on the counter greens from Dad's backyard garden. It looked like every other family dinner we'd had over the years. Familiar, predictable, safe. I helped set the table with the everyday plates, the ones reserved for regular Sundays, not holidays. Dad was in his usual seat, flipping through the newspaper, while the television murmured local news in the background. Jason showed up a few minutes later, holding a bottle of wine, talking before the door even fully closed behind him. "Holiday shipments are crazy this year," he said, loosening his jacket. "Routes are packed. I've been on the road non-stop." Mom smiled proudly. "That's because you take care of things." We sat down. Dad carved the ham at the head of the table like he always did. Plates were passed. Small talk flowed easily, weather patterns affecting deliveries, a neighbor's new puppy that kept digging under the fence, a minor shipping mix-up. Jason had resolved with a quick phone call to a client. Laughter came easily. I listened. I nodded. I waited. Coffee was poured after the main plates were mostly cleared. The conversation slowed naturally, settling into that comfortable lull that comes once everyone is full and relaxed. This was the moment I had chosen. I cleared my throat. Softly, not dramatically, just enough to shift the air at the table. "There's something I need to talk to you about," I said. Mom looked up first. Jason leaned back in his chair, folding his arms loosely. Dad kept his hands around his coffee mug. "I've been to a few medical consultations recently," I began carefully. "And the doctors found some issues. It's nothing catastrophic yet, but they said it needs attention soon to prevent it from becoming more serious." 3 faces stared back at me. "It involves some diagnostic procedures and follow-up treatment," I continued. "Insurance won't cover all of it because of policy limits on certain tests. The upfront cost is around $15,000. The number hung in the air. For a split second, there was silence. Mom paused mid-sip of her coffee. Then she set the mug down a little harder than necessary. Her eyebrows pulled together, but not in concern, in disbelief. "You're serious," she said, and then she let out a short, sharp laugh. "You're actually sitting here asking us for money." The laugh caught me off guard. I had prepared for questions, for worry, for logistical discussions, not laughter. "I'm just explaining the situation," I said evenly. After all these years of barely scraping by on your own, she continued shaking her head, as if she couldn't quite process it. "Now, you suddenly need $15,000. Dad stared down at the tablecloth, folding his napkin slowly between his fingers. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask about symptoms. He didn't ask which doctor. He didn't say my name. Jason let out a low chuckle and leaned back further in his chair. "This has to be a prank," he said, grinning. "You coming in here pretending you need cash. You've always acted so independent." "I'm not pretending," I replied quietly. "Oh, come on," he said, glancing at Mom for shared amusement. "You've made a whole personality out of not needing help. And now we're supposed to believe you're in some crisis." Crisis. That word landed strangely considering what I knew about the company. Mom crossed her arms. "It just feels convenient," she said. "All these years of distancing yourself from family support, and now you expect us to bail you out." I waited for anyone to ask what exactly was wrong. To ask if I was okay. To ask how serious it might be. No one did. Instead, Jason smirked. "Maybe it's time you finally admit you can't do everything alone," he said. "That grown-up act only works until life gets tough." The table felt smaller, the air heavier. "I'm not saying I can't handle things," I said carefully. "I'm saying I could use help." Mom let out another short laugh, softer this time, but sharper. "Help," she repeated. "You've always been the one who didn't want our kind of help." Their tone wasn't angry. It wasn't explosive. It was dismissive. Like I had told a joke that didn't quite land. Jason tapped his fingers against the table. "So what exactly do you want?" he asked, but there was no real curiosity in his voice. Just challenge. A loan. A handout. I noticed how quickly the language shifted. Loan. Handout. Not treatment. Not recovery. 15,000, I repeated, keeping my voice steady. Upfront. Dad finally cleared his throat, but he still didn't look at me. "That's a lot," he muttered. Mom shook her head slowly. "I just can't believe this," she said. "After everything. You coming here like this, after everything." I swallowed. "What exactly is wrong with you?" Jason asked. But it sounded performative, like a line delivered for effect, rather than concern. I opened my mouth to elaborate on the symptoms I had rehearsed. But before I could, he laughed again. "Actually, wait. Don't tell me. Let me guess, it's stress from working those corporate jobs you think are so impressive." Mom smiled faintly at that. The humiliation wasn't loud. It wasn't a shouting match. It was worse than that. It was being treated like the punchline to a joke I hadn't agreed to tell. Conversation began drifting sideways. Jason mentioned yard work plans for the next day. Mom asked Dad about dessert portions. The subject, the supposed medical emergency, was evaporating in real time, like it had never mattered. I sat there for a moment longer, letting the silence stretch between their casual comments. No one circled back. No one asked if I was scared. No one offered even a tentative "we'll figure it out." The request had become entertainment. I felt something settle inside me then. Not anger, not shock, confirmation. I looked at each of them one by one and realized they had already answered the question I came to ask. And that's when I decided it was time to tell them the truth. I let the silence stretch just a little longer. They were already moving on dessert yard work, some joke about a neighbor's new fence. The $15,000 I had supposedly needed for urgent medical treatment had evaporated like steam off the coffee cups in front of us. I folded my hands on the table. "There's something else you should know," I said calmly. Mom sighed, clearly expecting another inconvenience. Jason leaned back again, half smirking. "I don't actually need $15,000, I continued, "and I'm not struggling." That got their attention. "I earn $33,000 a month," I said, my voice steady. "As a senior project manager." The room froze. Mom blinked at me as if she hadn't heard correctly. Dad finally lifted his eyes from the tablecloth. Jason's smirk faltered, then disappeared completely. "You're joking," he said after a beat, his voice tight. "There's no way. I'm not joking." No one laughed this time. "I've been earning at that level for a while," I continued. "Consistent promotions, major client accounts, high-stakes projects. That's what I've been doing all these years." Mom's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She looked almost disoriented. Why wouldn't you tell us?" she asked, her tone no longer mocking, just unsettled. "Because it never seemed to matter," I replied. "Not here." Jason shifted in his chair. So this was what, some kind of stunt? I didn't look away from him. "It was a test," I said plainly. Dad's brow furrowed. "A test?" "Yes." I let that word land. "I also know about the debt," I added. That sentence hit harder than the income revelation. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Jason stiffened. "What debt?" he asked too quickly. "The investor who backed out?" I said evenly. "The loans being called in, the payroll concerns, the personal withdrawals flagged in the reports." Mom's face drained of color. "How could you possibly know that?" she whispered. "I was here," I said. "I overheard you, and then I confirmed enough to understand how serious it is." The air in the room felt completely different now. The casual ease from earlier had vanished. In its place was tension, sharp and raw. Jason ran a hand through his hair. "You had no right to listen in." "I didn't mean to," I cut in calmly, "but I did. And once I knew, I had to decide what to do with that information." Mom's eyes were glossy now. "Cynthia, we didn't want to worry you." I held her gaze. "You didn't want to involve me," I corrected gently. Dad finally spoke, his voice low. "If you've known all this time, why bring it up like this?" "Because I needed to know something before you ever asked me for help," I said. Jason leaned forward, urgency replacing sarcasm. "Asked you for help? We haven't asked you for anything." "Not yet," I replied. The truth hovered between us. Mom reached across the table slightly, her fingers trembling. "We didn't mean to hurt you earlier. It was just surprising. You've always acted so independent." "I am independent," I said. "That's the point." Jason's tone shifted again, this time edged with frustration. "So what you were trying to prove we wouldn't help you?" "I wanted to see if you would," I answered honestly. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Mom's voice broke. "Of course we would. We didn't realize it was serious." "No one asked," I said softly. That landed. Dad swallowed. "If you're making that kind of money," he began carefully, "then maybe we can talk about working together as a family." There it was. The pivot. Not concern about my supposed health. Not regret over the mocking tone. Not reflection on years of imbalance. Opportunity. Jason seized it. "Look, if you're in that position financially, you could help stabilize things. just temporarily. Bridge the gap while we restructure. We can fix this. Mom nodded quickly. Please, Cynthia, we can figure it out together. We've always been proud of you in our way. In our way. I felt something inside me settle into place. Not anger, not bitterness. Just clarity. I'm not going to fund the company, I said. All three of them reacted at once. Don't say that, Mom pleaded. You can't hold past misunderstandings against us right now. Jason snapped. This is real. I know it's real, I said evenly. That's why this matters. Dad leaned back slowly. Disappointment etched across his face. You'd really let everything fall apart. I didn't build it, I replied. And I wasn't part of the decisions that led here. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We're your family, and I came here tonight to see if I was yours, I said quietly. The words didn't come out harsh. They came out tired. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a soft scrape against the floor. Cynthia, don't leave like this, Mom said, rising halfway from her seat. I need space, I answered. Jason's jaw tightened. At least think about it. I have, I said. I picked up my coat, feeling strangely calm. The tension that had built over weeks, maybe years, had dissolved into something solid and certain. This wasn't revenge. It was a boundary. And as I walked out of the house that night, I knew with absolute clarity that I wasn't coming back to the table the same way again. The unraveling did not happen all at once, but once it began, it moved quickly. Within weeks of that dinner, the trucking company filed for bankruptcy. The filing itself was quiet, just paperwork submitted to a court clerk. But the implications were loud and final. The investor who had once promised expansion capital formally withdrew. Without that backing, the already fragile structure collapsed under its own weight. Creditors who had been patient while rumors circulated were no longer willing to wait. Loans were officially called in. Trucks that had once been symbols of growth were repossessed, one by one, hauled away in the early morning hours. Equipment yards emptied. Office furniture was tagged for auction. The company's accounts were combed through during proceedings. Questions that had once been dismissed as temporary cash flow issues turned into documented irregularities. Lawsuits began to surface, vendors claiming unpaid invoices, former partners alleging misrepresentation, even drivers pursuing unpaid wages. The language was dry and procedural, but the message was unmistakable. The business was finished. Jason's name appeared repeatedly in the filings. Investigations into financial mismanagement followed. Personal expenses blurred with business expenditures. Vehicle upgrades, luxury trips, and discretionary spending that once seemed harmless during profitable years now looked reckless in retrospect. Creditors alleged misuse of funds. Attorneys became regular fixtures in his life. The family home, once proudly described as fully secure, was not insulated from the fallout. When the company could no longer service its debts, collateral was activated. The house went into foreclosure. Notices appeared on the front door in bold legal type. Neighbors noticed. The driveway, once filled with upgraded vehicles, grew emptier. Cynthia learned about most of it not through family transparency, but through public records and forwarded screenshots. The first call from her mother came late at night. It wasn't accusatory, it wasn't angry, it was trembling. We didn't know it would get this bad, her mother said, voice thin. It's temporary. Just until we sort out the restructuring. Cynthia listened quietly. Then came her father's call 2 days later, more controlled, more strategic. You understand business cycles, he began as if she were a consultant rather than his daughter. Liquidity issues happen. We just need short-term support. A bridge. A bridge. The same language once reserved for investors. Jason's messages were different. Less formal, more urgent. Hey, I know things were tense at dinner, but we're family. Can you loan something? Anything helps. You're doing well. You said so yourself. When she didn't respond immediately, the tone shifted from casual insistent. This is bigger than pride. You'd really let mom and dad lose everything. Voicemails accumulated, some tearful, some defensive, some manipulative. Each one framed the crisis as unexpected, unfortunate, undeserved. None of them acknowledged the years that preceded it. None of them acknowledged the dinner. As foreclosure proceedings advanced, the calls intensified. Her mother cried openly now. Her father spoke of stress affecting his blood pressure. Jason oscillated between anger and desperation, blaming external market forces one day and former partners the next. Cynthia remained consistent. She did not block their numbers. She did not lash out. She did not lecture. She simply said no. Not coldly, not dramatically. Just clearly, I'm not able to help. When they pushed, she repeated it. I'm not going to provide financial support. The simplicity of her boundaries seemed to confuse them. They tried different angles, emotional appeals, guilt promises of repayment, reassurances that it would be temporary. Her father offered written agreements. Jason suggested equity transfers in hypothetical future ventures. Her mother asked if she could at least cover legal fees to reduce stress. Each request was framed as reasonable. Each one was declined. There were moments alone at night when the weight of it pressed against her chest. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel vindictive. She felt something quieter and more complicated. Grief, perhaps. Not for the company, but for the version of her family she once hoped might exist. She worried about their health. She worried about their aging years. She worried about the instability that comes with financial ruin. But worry did not translate into obligation. For the first time in her life, her response to their crisis was not reflexive accommodation. It was measured choice. As legal notices continued and assets were liquidated, extended, relatives began to reach out. Some called gently, asking if she could step in privately. Others were more direct, suggesting that as a successful child, she bore responsibility. You know how much they sacrificed, an aunt reminded her. They always supported you, a cousin insisted. Cynthia did not argue history. She did not debate narratives. She answered each inquiry the same way. This isn't something I'm taking on. When the house was officially listed for auction, her mother left a voicemail that lasted nearly 4 minutes. It ended with, "We never thought you would be the one to turn away." Cynthia replayed that line several times. Turn away. She examined it carefully. She had not turned away when she built her own stability without help. She had not turned away when her small professional requests were dismissed. She had not turned away at dinner when they mocked her supposed need. What she had turned away from was a pattern. As weeks passed, the urgency in the messages shifted to fatigue. Legal proceedings drained energy. Investigations consumed attention. Their appeals became less frequent, though no less pointed. Jason sent one final message, late one evening. So that's it. Cynthia stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she typed back, steady and unembellished. Yes, and she meant it. In the months that followed, Cynthia's life settled into something steady and intentional. Her work remained demanding, but it no longer felt like something she had to prove. The $33,000 she earned each month was no longer a secret or a shield. It was simply a reflection of years of quiet discipline. She chose her projects carefully, now prioritizing contracts that aligned with her values rather than chasing validation. She negotiated confidently. She declined work that felt exploitative. Financial autonomy was no longer just about numbers, it was about choice. Her apartment, once just a practical space, became a sanctuary. Mornings were unhurried. She brewed coffee, opened the windows, and let natural light fill the room before checking emails. Evenings were structured around calm rituals, cooking simple meals, reading, stretching, sometimes journaling. There was a noticeable absence of tension, no sudden calls demanding explanations, no financial emergencies crashing into her schedule. Her friendships deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. Without the constant emotional drain of family crises, she had energy to invest in people who reciprocated. Dinners with friends were easy and unguarded. They celebrated each other's promotions, listened without judgment, showed up consistently. When she spoke, she wasn't interrupted or compared. When she succeeded, no one minimized it. Support, she realized, felt different when it was mutual. She also began volunteering on weekends, mentoring young professionals from under-resourced backgrounds who were navigating their first corporate roles. She recognized pieces of her younger self in their hesitation and quiet resilience. Offering guidance felt grounding. It wasn't about rescuing anyone. It was about sharing perspective, about making sure someone else didn't feel invisible. Travel became another quiet joy. She visited cities she'd once bookmarked and postponed. She wandered museums without rushing, sat alone at seaside cafes, took long walks in unfamiliar neighborhoods. Each trip reinforced a simple truth: she was capable of building a full life, independent of anyone's approval. There were still moments when memories surfaced. Public praise showered on Jason. The house down payment celebrated as an investment in potential. The way her own modest requests had been brushed aside as unnecessary. Those recollections no longer triggered sharp anger. Instead, they clarified something essential. Love without respect had always felt unstable. For years, she had mistaken proximity for loyalty and obligation for connection. She had believed that enduring favoritism quietly was the price of belonging. But belonging, she now understood, required reciprocity. It required acknowledgement. It required care that moved in both directions. Blood ties, she learned, do not automatically create mutual respect. They create history. What fills that history, fairness or imbalance, accountability or denial, determines whether the relationship is nourishing or corrosive. Her boundaries were not punishments. They were acknowledgments of reality. Financial independence had given her freedom, but emotional clarity had given her peace. She no longer felt the need to justify her choices or soften her truth to preserve someone else's comfort. The quiet of her current life was not loneliness. It was equilibrium. And in that equilibrium, she found something she had never fully experienced before: a sense of self that did not depend on being the overlooked child, the responsible one, or the fallback solution. It simply depended on her. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If any part of Cynthia's journey felt familiar, if you've ever wrestled with love, loyalty, and self-respect, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts or experiences in the comments. These conversations matter, and if this story resonated with you, consider liking and subscribing so we can continue sharing reflections like this. Until next time, take care of your heart and honor your boundaries.